One of the questions I get asked the most is, how do you find time for it all? Between running a business, staying committed to my hybrid training, and most importantly, being a present dad is not always easy, and it's definitely not perfect. In today's episode, I'm going to be giving you a real look into what a typical week looks like for me. Super excited to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for tuning in to the Hybrid Athlete Dad podcast. In today's episode, briefly touched on it, but I'm going to be talking about a week in my life balancing work, fitness, and fatherhood. Now, before I dive into today's episode, I like to go over anything going on in my life, fitness, health, nutrition wise, anything that I think you as a listener out there may find interesting. Maybe you don't find it interesting, but nonetheless, I like to share it and just get my thoughts out. So, without further ado, hopping into today's episode. Been super nice this week running earlier in the week, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday running. There has been no heat, which has been very nice. What I mean by that is obviously it's the summer months, but it was, I think, high 50s, low 60s running, which was nice. And then Thursday, Friday, we're going to jump up into the 90s again. So a little bit warmer, but it has been very nice running in no heat. And sometimes I find when I'm on my runs, I forget why I'm doing these runs. Yes, I want to get the physical benefit, but sometimes I just want to decompress, to take off the stress that I have, may have going on in my life, and just really just enjoying the runs. And there's so many times where I'm just getting through the run just to get back to work or get back to what I'm doing, and just not taking that time to take in the surroundings from my run and just really look around and take in, you know, I don't want to say nature, but like, taking the trees and the sunlight, and just especially this time of year where it's super nice and to be outside and just really just trying to take it all in. But it has been nice where last week I split it up a little bit, my runs, because I've been doing interviews. Unfortunately, was laid off my company at the end of June, so I've been doing interviews, and was scheduling them a little bit earlier in the day. So now I've tried to schedule them more about 2, 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So that's given me the opportunity to do more straight runs instead of splitting up like a 6 mile run to 3 miles at the gym, then 3 miles when I come back from the gym. Just different things like that I didn't really. It was fine, but I would prefer not to split up my runs too often if I could help it. So that's been very nice this week, just being able to go and do the full runs, and then just trying to take everything in. And it's been nice. I mean, obviously the goal is to find a role at some point, but in the meantime, being able to run earlier in the day and not have to come back and have any work meetings, which is very nice. I still run my own side hustle, so I do have occasional meetings for that come up throughout the week and work to do for that side hustle. But it's just a nice, haven't had that. Every time I would be running in my previous role, it would be before work, and I'd come back, have to dive, head first into work. So it's been a little bit different. So I'm trying to enjoy it before eventually I do find a role. And now it's back to that. It's back to that same process as before. So that's been nice in that sense. Hopefully it doesn't go on too long, but nonetheless, we'll keep powering through it. And then also, I know I mentioned it briefly before in previous episodes, but I felt as though with my job, and I know this is more of a hybrid athlete podcast, but I think there's a work aspect of it where I just never really felt that fulfilled in the role that I was working for. And I just remember being there on a meeting on a Friday, so maybe it was a blessing that I ended up getting laid off, because I really was honestly starting to look for other roles. But it was in a meeting, and it was a Friday afternoon. It was 3 o'clock, meetings an hour, 3 to 4, and just getting drilled by the team on KPIs, and this is what we need to be seeing, and this is what the client is looking for, and just, oh man, it was a lot. Like, I'm exhausted. It's the end of the week. I've ran quite a bit. I've lifted quite a bit. I've worked quite a bit. And just like the word like KPI was just like, I don't want to hear that word again. I mean, obviously in a marketing role, that's a big factor there, but it's just I don't want to hear I don't want to hear that. But long story short, so just was looking to do something with a little bit more purpose, and it was like literally that same day got a letter in the mail from our local volunteer ambulance service, looking for donations, looking for volunteers. And I was like, that's something that's totally outside my comfort zone, something I've never done before. So just sent in my information, got a call back, went in, filled some background paperwork, and they could met the other volunteers, did an orientation, and as of today's gonna be my first night riding. So when I'm recording this episode, it's on a Thursday, so I'm gonna be on shift from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. There's not too many calls that come into the town. I would say on average, there's about 3 or 4 that come in per day. There was one day where there was basically no calls that came in at all. I mean, it's a small town. It's volunteer, so there's obviously not a lot of calls that come in. But I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to just putting myself in uncomfortable situations and just really trying to grow as a person. And part of it for me was, I know I talked a little bit about the marketing and the role, and again, I don't want to harp too much on this, but just looking for something, just trying something else new as a career profession. Maybe could this be something that I want to go more into public service instead of going to the private sector? Is this something that I could potentially do in the future? And I'm not sure. Maybe I hate it and I resign after a week, or maybe I do enjoy it. So just trying something new, and I think that's for anyone out there listening where maybe you're unhappy with your career and you're looking to make a shift, and just trying something that's radically different. In this scenario, I was still going to be in my previous role, but obviously that's not the case anymore. But I was going to try this while I was working that gig. But nonetheless, super excited about it. And if I have any updates, I'll be sharing them next week. I know we're very HIPAA compliant, so I can't share too many details other than, hey, had my first ride, second ride, and whatnot. But super excited about that. So more to come on that. But diving into today's episode, which is a week in my life of balancing work, fitness, and fatherhood. And I've said it before, I'm not being into fitness and what you consider like a hybrid athlete. Maybe you see these hybrid athlete influencers out there that they're coaches and their main job is only, training for whatever endurance sport or whatever race that they're going for. Where for me, I look at, and I always take it with a grain of salt. And I know that's the name of the podcast, but the hybrid athlete dad. And for me, it's like, okay, I want to be good at lifting, and I want to be good at running, but at the same time, I want to be a good father, and I have to balance work within that as well. So it's this combination of trying to balance work, and trying to balance this fitness, and it's trying to balance fatherhood as well. Now, to set the stage a little bit and where I'm coming from, I want to go through a little bit about current responsibilities. So work, that was obviously a big part of it, but right now it's just running my side hustle, and the goal is, while I have this free time, I'm going to be spending more time trying to grow this side hustle. And then previously it was working for my company, and that would be in a typical 9 to 5 role. There was the training aspect of it, which was, for me right now and where I am, it's strength training 5 days a week, and it's running 30 miles per week. And then it's also being there for my family. So what does that entail? That means being a good husband to my wife. That means being a good dad to my daughter, and really prioritizing those relationships. So you can look at it holistically. So I have work that's going to take up time. I have training that takes up time, and I have family that takes up time. Now, how do I manage all three of those aspects? So maybe my work performance doesn't decline, my fitness performance doesn't decline, or hopefully nothing ever declines with my family. But how do I really go ahead and, manage it all? I would say something that's really, really worked for me is just building the habits and being consistent in my routine. And what I mean by that, and really diving into it, is, so our daughter, she goes from daycare typically each day from 8 to 4. I'll drop her off about 8, and then I'll come home, and that's when I get my running in. And then my wife will pick her up at 4, and I would typically be working till about 4:30, and hopefully by that time I can end my day. So between those hours of about, for me, about 9 to 4:30, 9 to 5, that's when I'm working. Now, when I'm done working, I don't want to keep working. I mean, there's always more work to do in my business. There was always more work to do in my role, but just because I have more work to do doesn't necessarily mean that I want to get it done. I would rather prioritize my relationship with my wife and daughter than just going up to my office and working more on my computer. So I know that's that given time. I know, okay, if I want to be home for when my daughter wakes up, which is about 7 a.m., then I have to get up about, depending on the day. So today's Thursday, so I got up at 4:15, and I get up at 4:15 on Mondays. Just the workouts are just a little bit longer. I need about an extra 20, 25 minutes or so in those workouts. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, I get up at 4:50. Sleeping into 4:50 compared to 4:15 is like a blessing, but that's neither here nor there. So I have about that 35-minute difference right there. And then I typically would have the same breakfast on Monday through Friday. I would typically have lunch. I would have a similar lunch, but I would mix it up a little bit. And then for dinners, I'm very consistent with the dinners that I have, and it just makes it so much easier. And I know, like, okay, I'm going to be cooking dinner, and my wife's going to be outside with her daughter, especially this time of year when it's super nice out. And then I know, okay, like, once I've cooked dinner, my wife's watched her daughter, then we're going to reverse roles where now my wife's doing the dishes and I'm going to be the one watching my daughter. And it's a good system that we have set up. So my wife watches our daughter before dinner, and then I watch her after dinner. So I get to spend a little bit of time with her outside, where my wife was being able to spend a little bit of time with her beforehand. And then we have our nighttime routine. And I find that just being very consistent and figuring out what works best for me. And I know I could always run more during the week. I could lift more during the week. But what's the added benefit there? Is it going to be tracking time that I'm going to be spending with my family and spending it with my wife? So it's trying to just find that happy medium of how you're organizing everything in your life. And not that this is perfect by any means, but this is just what I have found that's really worked for me over the last couple, I don't want to say months, but I would say the last year, 2 years or so, or probably about the last year and a half since our daughter was born, and I started to really get into running and more into the nutrition aspect of it as well. And I know I touched on it briefly, but just having the right habits and routines is just absolutely key. So I know exactly what I'm going to be eating, what I'm going to be typically doing at the gym, when I'm going to the gym, when I'm going to be spending time with my daughter, and just as having that organization really just helps me to stay consistent. And then having that communication with my wife, knowing that, okay, if I am cooking dinner, she's going to be handling our daughter, and vice versa. If she's doing the dishes, then I'm going to be hanging out with our daughter. And same thing on the week, on the weekends, being, having that communication where it's like sometimes on Saturdays, I like to do a 5 mile run in the morning and letting her know that, hey, I'm going to be doing this as soon as I wake up. I'm going to go out the door, and just having that open door of communication with her. And the biggest piece I've learned of all of it is just making sure I'm taking care of the energy that I have. I don't typically drink coffee, and I don't typically drink energy drinks, so most of the time I'm just drinking water. And I find that I don't want to expend so much energy, say running and lifting and working, that now all of a sudden my daughter's home and I'm just exhausted, and she wants to play because she has boundless energy, but I'm having a hard time because I'm exhausted. And there's been times that's like that. So I try to be cognizant of, okay, if I'm doing a harder workout or if I'm doing a longer run, what can I do to prioritize my body so that way I am back in the game and then I'm energized for when my daughter comes home. And especially when my daughter comes home, because even though my wife and I work at home together, she's downstairs and I'm upstairs. And for the most part, we're apart for the majority, other than when I go downstairs to say, check in and or to go downstairs to make lunch for the day. But it's just, taking in my energy, because again, I don't want to be exhausted when my daughter comes home, and it's just recognizing how I feel after a certain workout or how I feel after a certain workday or a certain run. And it's just, again, it's just taking in what my body is giving me. Now, I hope you enjoyed today's episode on a week in my life, balancing work, fitness, and fatherhood. I mean, there's so many things I could go through about the whole routines and really everything, but really the main goal that I want you to take away from today's episode is just to have intention, structure, and flexibility when it comes to balancing your work, being your fitness, and whether you're a father or whether you're a mother. And just to remind yourself that it's not perfect, but it's possible to excel in every area of your life. Again, I hope you enjoyed today's episode on a week in my life balancing work, fitness, and fatherhood. And I hope you tune into next week's episode where I discuss building mental resilience through early morning workouts.